Headquarters, 2nd Cavalry Division, 20 March 1863. General, I have the honor to report that pursuant to instructions from you, I left the main body of this army on the 16th instant for the purpose of crossing the Rappahannock River and attacking cavalry forces of the enemy reported to be in the vicinity of Culpeper Courthouse, under the command of General Fitzhugh Lee. My orders were to attack, rout, or destroy him. To execute these orders, I was directed to take a force of 3,000 cavalry and 6 pieces of artillery. Accompanying the orders were several reports containing information the operations of the cavalry north of the river, in the vicinity of Brentsville, the force of which was reported to be 250 to 1,000, with at least 1 piece of artillery, and I was directed to take every precaution to ensure the success of my expedition. At 4 a.m., I set out from Morrisville with a command of about 2,100 men. Kelly's Ford was selected for the crossing because the opposite country was better known to me than that beyond any other ford, and it afforded the shortest route to the enemy's camp. The head of the column arrived at the ford at 8 a.m. The crossing was found obstructed by fallen trees, forming an abatis upon both banks, which defended by 80 sharpshooters covered by rifle pits and houses on the opposite bank, rendered the crossing difficult. 2 squadrons were dismounted and advanced under shelter of an empty mill range or canal which runs near the bank of the river, whence a brisk fire was at once opened, under which an attempt was made to cross by the advance, which failed. 2 subsequent attempts of the pioneers met with the same fate. During this time, a crossing was attempted 1/4 of a mile below, but it was found impracticable, owing to the depth of the stream and the precipitous character of the banks. After half an hour had passed in endeavors to cross, my chief of staff, Major S.E. Chamberlain, who had immediate charge of the operations at the crossing, selected a party of 20 men and placed them under the command of Lieutenant Brown, 1st Rhode Island Cavalry, with orders to cross the river and return. Lieutenant Brown obeyed his orders, and the abatis was passed. 25 of the enemy were captured. The 1st Brigade was immediately crossed and placed in position, followed by 2 pieces. Then the 2nd Brigade, the remainder of the battery, and the reserve. The stream has a very rapid current at the ford, and was about 4 feet 5 inches deep. The ammunition was taken of the limbers and carried over in nose bags by the cavalry. The horses of my command were watered by squadrons, and at 12 a.m. I moved on, with the 1st Brigade in advance. Looking towards the west from the ford, one sees half a mile in advance a skirt of woods on higher ground, around the right of which may be seen an open field. It is about 1/4 of a mile through the woods. When the head of the column reached the western edge of this timber, the enemy were discovered rapidly advancing in line, with skirmishers in front. I immediately ordered the 4th New York to the right to form front into line and advance to the edge of the woods and use carbines. The 4th Pennsylvania to the left with the same orders, and a section of artillery to the front to open fire. The 4th Pennsylvania and the 4th New York, I regret to say, did not come up to the mark at the first, and it required some personal exertions on the part of myself and staff to bring them under the enemy's fire, which was now sweeping the woods. They soon regained their firmness and opened with effect with their carbines. At this moment, I observed 2 or 3 columns of the enemy moving at a trot toward my right. The right was then advanced into open field beyond the house, and the enemy's left attacked by McIntosh and Gregg. Duffy, in the meantime, had formed the 1st Rhode Island, 4th Pennsylvania to charge him. While Duffy advanced in splendid order and charged the enemy, the gallantry of Duffy had perhaps made him forged to leave any position of his command. Note, during this action, Major Pelham of Stewart's command came to the battlefield to assist, even though his command was not involved. Pelham, a noted favorite of the Confederate brass and brave throughout the war to this point, unfortunately fell during the attack through the woods, mortally wounded. He was the highest-ranking officer to perish, and his marker is the only one on the field. We found ourselves through the woods and, in the face of the enemy, draw up in line of battle on both sides of the road, half a mile in front. It became necessary to extend my line to the left as soon as possible. It was 5:30 p.m. and it was necessary to advance my cavalry upon their entrenched position to make a direct and desperate attack or to withdraw across the river. Either operation would be attended with immense hazard. My horses were very much exhausted. We had been successful thus far. I deemed it proper to withdraw. The reserve was advanced in front and deployed to mask the battery, which was withdrawn, and the regiments retired in succession until the ford was reached and crossed without the loss of a man in the operation. The country in which the operations were conducted is level and open, and had the ground been firm, would have been eminently fitted for a cavalry fight. The principal result achieved by this expedition has been that our cavalry has been brought to feel their superiority in battle. They have learned the value of discipline and the use of their arms. At the first view, I must confess that 2 regiments wavered, but they did not lose their sense, and a few energetic remarks brought them to a sense of their duty. After that, the feeling became stronger throughout the day that this was our fight, and the maneuvers were performed with a precision which the enemy did not fail to observe. The enemy's first attack was vigorous and fierce, and it took about an hour to convince him on the first field that it was necessary for him to abandon it. Between his first guard advance and his final abort, several small charges and counter-charges which filled up the time. I ought to mention that in front of the first wood there is a deep, broad ditch, along which runs a heavy stone wall, which served as cover for my carbiners, but which was impassable for cavalry except around the right flank, and where it was broken down the center. And this impeded my operation somewhat. In the second field, the enemy's cavalry force was superior to mine, but it was consistently repulsed. And when I withdrew my command, it was with unabated confidence in our strength as against cavalry. I hoped they would advance, but they made no demonstration worthy of notice, even while I was withdrawing my command. The officers and men of the battery performed their arduous duties with alacrity. I believe it is the universal desire of the officers and men of my division to meet the enemy again as soon as possible. I am, General, very respectfully, your obedient servant, William W. Averell, Brigadier General of Volunteers, Commanding.